The Association of the United States Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Thought Leaders Webinar Series, a webinar series featuring military leaders and contemporary military authors. Kicking off today's webinar is AUSA's President and Chief Executive Officer, General Carter Ham.
Good afternoon to our friends in the United Kingdom and elsewhere in Europe, and good morning to our friends and members here in the United States. We're really glad that you've joined us today, and I think we have a great program lined up for you. You know, we created this Thought Leaders webinar series to bring you senior Army leaders, authors, and others speaking on topics of current interest to America's Army and our allies and friends. Again, thanks for joining us, and we truly appreciate your support for AUSA's programs and for our Army. We're really honored today to host Lieutenant General Chris Tickell, British Deputy Chief of the General Staff. For you Americans, that's the equivalent of the Army's Vice Chief of Staff, to discuss the implications of the United Kingdom's Integrated Security and Defense Review, often referred to simply as the IR, for the British Army as it transforms into a modern expeditionary army for global Britain. And as the report says, the British Army will be leaner, lighter, faster to respond, and more effectively matched to current and future threats. This will be delivered by more productive integration of the reserves, increased lethality of weapon systems, and survivability of platforms, and a more specialized workforce. Some of that might sound pretty much familiar to those who watch the United States Army. Our program today, General Tickell will offer some prepared remarks. Then we'll take as many audience questions as time will allow. To help us in that regard, I'm joined here at AUSA headquarters by Brigadier Paul Tickell, Brigadier Paul Tennant, the military attaché for the United Kingdom here in Washington, D.C., who, in addition to facilitating the program, will serve as interpreter should that be required throughout today's events. Please, for our audience, take advantage of this great opportunity to listen and to interact with General Tickell and ask questions. And you can do so by using the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions for our guest today. Lieutenant General Chris Tickell was commissioned into the Royal Engineers in 1983 and spent 6 years as a troop commander in Germany, Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom, Botswana, and Norway. After the Staff College and a tour in the Ministry of Defense, he took command of a Parachute Squadron. This included tours in Bosnia and Kosovo. As Lieutenant Colonel, he worked in the operations branch of the Army headquarters before taking command of 23 Engineer Regiment, Aris Hope, as it deployed to Kuwait and Iraq for the Second Civil War in January 2003. We would call that Iraqi freedom. On promotion to Colonel in 2005, he moved to the Directorate of Training, then attended the Higher Command and Staff course. Promoted to Brigadier in 2007, he commanded 8th Force Engineer Brigade for 2 years, including a 6-month deployment to Afghanistan. After 2 years running the Army Staff course, he returned to the Ministry of Defense, working for the Chief of Defense Personnel for 9 months. Promoted again in 2013, he commanded the Army's Recruiting and Training Division. He next served as the Army's Director of Capability before being promoted to Lieutenant General and Deputy Chief of the General Staff in August of 2019. All of that simply says exactly the right portfolio to help the British Army transform for the future. He was appointed member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in 2000, an officer of that cohort in 2003, and commander level in 2010. He is married, and if you think his military assignments have been very challenging, he has 2 teenage daughters, to put all of that in perspective. So, General Tickell, thank you so much for carving time out from your travels. I know you're recently off travel once again, and we're really pleased to have you join us at AUSA. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, and a very warm good afternoon from the UK, and I recognise that's good morning to most of you. A great privilege for me to be able to talk to you all today. I know that this is a brilliant series of webinars, and I count myself very fortunate to be able to take part in it, not least as we face a fast-changing and ever-changing world. I'm conscious that the last 12 months, we have all been through a series of very personal experiences with COVID. I think probably the thing that's united us all has been the sort of rather enforced digital boot camp that we have either enjoyed, or frankly tried to avoid. But the reality is, I think we're all much more comfortable with this sort of interaction. And of course, it confers also huge advantages in terms of, frankly, me just being able to talk to quite a wide audience over your side of the Atlantic in this way, which is wonderful. But of course, also the experience has sort of underlined some accelerating geostrategic, technological, and cultural trends. Trends whose endpoints are not a surprise, I don't think, to any of us. But of course, they do appear more stark given the relative speed of their arrival over the last few months. And of course, from the UK's perspective, the speed of this change and the challenge to deliver security within that context has been recognised by the British government in recent months, as specifically the UK Defence was offered a multi-year spending settlement as part of the integrated review, which will boost British defence spending by just shy of £17 billion over the next 4 years, and which is very much focused on capital investment, specifically in equipment terms, but also in infrastructure as well. And knowing, as I know your army so well, I'm very privileged to work so closely with some of your brilliant leaders. I know that financial certainty is something that we collectively are all after. And of course, what it does do is it enables us in the UK to pursue what I will describe shortly as genuinely an ambitious programme of modernisation and transformation. A word just briefly on the integrated review, which General Ham has very eloquently summarised, but it does represent, in a broader sense, a comprehensive articulation of the UK's national security policy. It's a document which was published formally in March, and it outlines three fundamental national interests that bind the citizens of the UK together, and that is the triumvirate of sovereignty, security, and prosperity. And of course, the IR also marks an important waypoint for the UK as the world has changed significantly since our 2015 Strategic Defence and Security Review. And it also sets out the vision for our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who he refers to as Global Britain. And I will refer and come back to that theme throughout what I'm about to say. Firstly, if I can, just to sort of sketch out how we see the strategic environment. I think in the current climate more than ever, we are experiencing collectively a prevailing international trend towards fragmentation. The demarcation of which I think has become even clearer in the era of COVID-19, which certainly in Europe has driven some pretty significant national introspection, notwithstanding the specific challenges of the European Union. And these fissures, meanwhile, I think are being exploited very deliberately by revisionist and revanchist states, their proxies and their affiliates, to challenge what we all regard as the rule-based international order on what we've all depended on for so long for our security. And these challenges are very deliberately being calibrated to avoid the risk of Western conventional military deployments by blending traditional tactics such as fait accompli and misinformation with new technologies and domains enabled by a nuanced understanding of the loopholes in the legislative, and democratic processes of the nations that they are seeking to undermine. And so as the threat becomes predictable in its asymmetry, we, of course, must design our forces to compete with this asymmetry and remain dominant enough above the threshold for conventional war to ensure our adversaries seek to remain below it. And of course, the current context reminds us that not all threats are military in origin, even if the military play a part in the response. So climate change, disease, famine, natural disaster are just few of the sources of instability that catalyze threats to the United Kingdom and its interests in an increasingly interconnected world. So what for the British Army? Well, for us, three challenges have expanded the breadth and depth of activity that the Army must be manned, equipped, and trained to conduct. Firstly, the requirement to compete in multiple domains, including cyber. Secondly, a broadening of our organizational design from purely warfighting to include, by design, operating, which of course forms a central pillar in Britain's contribution to the renewed competition for international influence. And thirdly, the reimagining of modern conventional deterrence to offer a more layered and responsive answer to current and emerging threats. And to achieve this, the British Army must do a number of things. Firstly, we must modernize our close combat capability, which frankly has suffered from underinvestment in recent years. Secondly, we must generate additional capabilities to compete in the grey zone. And thirdly, we must transform our ability to fight a multi-domain battle in which data is becoming a primary output rather than purely an enabling function. And our pacing threat is not just a reflection of where the money has landed in terms of our defence settlement, but it is also the pace at which warfare is changing in laboratories such as Syria and Nagorno-Karabakh, which we, of course, have all been watching with interest over the last few years. Now, the scale of change for us means that we must be ruthlessly future-focused in our priorities, and our end state must produce a future land combat system that is lethal on its realization and has the structures, relationships, and legislation to allow it to evolve continuously and to do so faster than the enemy threat. It will rely on systemic experimentation and innovation, and it will require it at a tempo that demands a fundamental change in relationships with industry, both within the United Kingdom and internationally, and the processes, of course, that govern it. So the integrated review really just genuinely offers the British Army a massive opportunity and allows us to leave the legacy of Iraq and Afghanistan behind us without forgetting the hard-won lessons that we won out there. And it also allows us to move away from what I would describe as a single organizing principle, i.e. that of a warfighting division, that, if I'm being honest, was really organized to deliver an analog fight, which frankly was not fit for purpose. Indeed, I would say that the integrated review presents the British Army with a blueprint that is genuinely fit both for the information age and the 21st century. And of course, underpinning this is, as I've described, a financial programme from the government that will deliver the transformation, that will make the army more lethal, better protected, better networked, digitally connected, one that enjoys a global presence, but one that has a warfighting core and ethos. So to that end, our future army will be will be built on some key capabilities, and in particular 4 key programs, that being Boxer, our mechanized infantry vehicle, the upgrade to Challenger 2, aka Challenger 3, and you will see announcements of that, I would suggest, in the next 24 hours. The delivery of the AH-64 Echo, and I'm delighted to say that we have the first 8 of those platforms of 50 already in the UK being built as we speak. And of course, the Ajax medium armor platform that is already entering service, specifically with the Household Cavalry Regiment as we speak. And it is those platforms that will provide the bedrock for the future. But these also with a rebalancing from the close fight to our recapitalization of the M270 launchers for MLRS, which went on contract in March. A much greater, significantly greater investment in EWSI and cyber, all of which will be underpinned by a digital spine and, of course, ISTAR. All of that together will deliver a core warfighting capability that is genuinely optimized for the 21st century. And it will also allow us to seamlessly integrate across the domains and, of course, critically with our allies. But we will, as we talked about at the beginning, also have a more expeditionary army that will have a greater global posture, and that army will build on the global training hubs that are already in existence. So we'll get more out of our training bases that already exist in Germany, in Kenya, in Brunei, in Belize, and indeed in the Oman. And we will do so by integrating across defence and indeed across government. And these training hubs will act as lily pads for the deployment of forces from the United Kingdom and provide a framework to support persistent presence in those regions, offering insight, access and enablement for wider army and defence engagement, nurturing host nation trust, and of course identifying opportunities for the government as part of the Global Britain agenda. And the vanguard of our global posture will be based around our newly formed Ranger battalions, and these forces will act as the British Army's nerve endings, persistently forward. They will both deter adversaries from recourse to conflict and will also provide the necessary warning to allow us to prepare for other operations should that be required. Now, all of what I've described will be underpinned by a much greater focus and closer links to industry. And of course, that working and the importance of working with our industrial partners has been recognized by the writing and soon launching of a land industry strategy, which sadly we have lacked not only for many years, I would say for many decades. But that land industry strategy will enable us to work much more closely with both SMEs and OMEs, I think to mutual advantage. And it will develop our innovative, productive and globally competitive land industry sector in a way that we've not been able to get after hitherto. And therefore our investment in high-end technologies over the next 4 years will bring into service a range of digitally enabled open architecture capabilities, which will allow us to deliver the transformative effect that I've just described. But allied to this closer work with industry will also be a much greater focus on experimentation. I've been very closely involved and been lucky enough to be involved in Project Convergence and indeed the Army Futures Command since it was set up by General Murray a few years ago. And we are working we're working hand in hand with the AFC, but we are very much doing our own work through auspices such as the Army Warfighting Experiments, series of experiments, and the setting up of our own battle lab, which will enable us to deliver experimentation 24/7, 365 days a year with industry. And I think we have all learned that the marriage of industry with our operators delivers a much faster and greater effect than one can achieve in isolation. So we are very much getting after experimentation, driving into concepts such as prototype warfare, whereby we will be taking these capabilities, testing them on operations, expecting some of them to fail, but only by doing that will we learn and keep up with the opportunities that technology offers. And finally, of course, a key part of the integrated review is the importance of deepening our relationships with our allies and partners across the world. The relationship, I would say, that the British Army enjoys with the United States Army has and always will be critical to our nations as we move forward. As General Ham described at the beginning, notwithstanding the COVID challenges, I've been lucky enough to continue my series of visits to the United States. Indeed, I've been over 3 times in the last 8 months. Once to actually go and visit Project Convergence, but more recently, only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was back in Futures Command in Austin, and then went also to see Warfighter in Fort Hood, where we had 3 United Kingdom Division under the command of 3 Corps. And all of that really just reinforces all that we have learnt over the many decades we have operated together in terms of sharing blood and treasure, which whereby we must continue to work hand in hand, both on operations, in training, and in experimentation, because it is only that through those lenses will we be able to ensure that critical strategic advantage for our nations, but also ensure that we are delivering the best effect for our young men and women when they stand in harm's way. But I am incredibly optimistic about that relationship continuing, and it is all for the good. So in sum, I would say the British Army is facing very exciting times. It has not been a straightforward process, the integrated review. And indeed, when I was over there a few weeks ago, I discussed with the Vice Chief the challenge of balancing out end strength, current readiness, and future modernization. And of course, we took a hit on our end strength as part of those deliberations. But notwithstanding that, I look to the future here, and I look to my teenage daughters, and I can absolutely look them in the eye and say, this is an army that I would love to join. I have no doubt that we will be smarter, we will be sharper, we will be harder, and we will be more dangerous with a greater global presence than we enjoy at the moment, and we will be fit for the digital age. Critically, we will be structured and prepared for the future fight rather than what is behind us. And I would suggest that our currency needs to be measured in terms of capability, in terms of utility, and in terms of readiness, rather than a metric which certainly in the UK we sometimes revert to, i.e. one of size. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic also because we'll be doing it hand in hand with our greatest ally. And on that point, sir, I will stop, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Well, thanks very much, General Tickell, for that really comprehensive review. It is exciting. I mean, you can sense the innovation, the adaptation that the British Army is applying to this endeavor amidst, by any measure, incredibly challenging circumstance in the present day. We do have a number of questions coming in, and again, for our audience, please use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen to to submit your questions. General Tickell, if I could start us off with a question about size, and of course, there's always an issue of capability and capacity, and how do you get that right? You mentioned briefly that you're having to make some reduction, likely reductions in the numbers, and does 72,500, is that the whole force? Does that integrate the reserves in that? Is there risk in that size of an army? Is that give you sufficient capacity to achieve your strategic objectives? And if you could talk a bit about how you balance that risk.
So thank you for that question, because it's a very topical one. So our overall end strength will be just north of 100,000, and that is both regular and reserve. So the 72,500 that is talked about are regular officers and soldiers. The reserve will remain at about 30,000, so we'll be north of 100,000. And we are very much, as I know you do, focused on a whole force, which is very much about both regular and reserve, and that's how we're moving forward. It is no secret that it is an emotive issue in terms of the size of the regular force of the British Army. But I think our view is that the opportunities that technology offers us in the future suggests that you can mitigate the formal issue about numbers by some of that technology. So if we look at some of the work that we are both doing at both sides of the Atlantic on manned and unmanned teaming, it means that if I talk about, say, for instance, a recce troop, which for us would normally have 8 platforms and 8 Ajax in the future, but actually when those 8 platforms are linked to unmanned air and ground platforms, you will deliver probably a much greater coverage and in 3D in a way that traditionally those 8 platforms would not manage to achieve. Ergo, you are mitigating, say, a reduction in numbers of manned platforms through that greater autonomy. I think also when you look at the opportunities that artificial intelligence and machine learning gets after, it means that some of the, I'm going to describe it as back-end activity, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense at all, but some of the challenges we all face in terms of command and control will be able and is increasingly being done by machines. It doesn't mean, as we all know, that commanders cannot and must not be the one, they must be the ones that still take the decisions ultimately. But actually some of the really challenging activity in terms of blending information and intelligence feeds can be done by machines in order to queue up the right decisions by commanders. And therefore you can start to drive down some of the numbers in terms of workforce involved. Is there risk? Absolutely, there's risk. Of course there is, because there is a bit of a bet in all of what I've said in terms of a reliance on automation. I think it is a risk and a bet that we should absolutely be taking. And I think, if I look at the great work that goes on in Project Convergence, that is absolutely a direction of travel that I recognise on your side of the Atlantic. So I think it's the right decisions and the right choice that we have made. I suspect, though, that the second half of this decade will allow those sort of opportunities that I've talked about to really accelerate. So that there's more experimentation and innovation to happen over this side of the 2025 mark, and then let's try and accelerate away in the second half of the decade.
No, thanks for that. It is certainly a challenging balance, and part of that, of course, is an analysis, the estimate of what is the operating environment going to demand. How do you prepare for that? So a question in that regard from Christopher S. It's talking about the modernization that you've addressed, and that certainly is addressed in the integrated review. Is that predicated principally to counterbalance Russia in a NATO context or in Europe, or is it more shaped by the Prime Minister's view of global Britain?
If you like, that tension between our commitment to NATO and that global posture definitely played out during the review. But we should be under no doubt and no illusions about our absolute commitment to NATO. The focus and the predominant driving state threat in terms of what has driven the decisions has, of course, been Russia. But that is not to say that we don't want to be able, as I've sort of described, to get after a more global posture. And what we need to be able to do is balance, and this is a sort of, this of course is a challenge that we will work through, is ensuring that notwithstanding that global posture, we need to be able to deliver at readiness the right formations to meet our commitments to NATO. I'm pretty confident, very confident that we will be able to do that. But the preeminence is absolutely our commitment to NATO, and that is not wavered.
Thank you very much for that. You mentioned in your remarks the Ranger battalions as kind of being the nerve endings of the global force. Could you expand a little bit about the roles and missions that you expect of the Ranger battalions? And for our American audience, how are your Ranger battalions different from our Ranger battalions?
So I think we would all recognize that our special forces, or SOF, over the last few years have been focused on some specific threats that they've been trying to get after. The creation of our Ranger battalions will allow our Tier 1 SF to get back to some of their core activities. We have already, as you may or may not know, our specialized infantry battalions, and those battalions already go and train, advise, and assist indigenous forces around the world, and they've been a very successful innovation since 2015. What the Ranger battalions will do is they will do the train, assist, and advise, but they will also fulfill the accompany missions, which the specialized infantry battalions have not done hitherto. So the key discriminator between what already exists is, if you like, filling in the gap between at one end our traditional special forces capability, and at the other end our specialized infantry battalions, to fill in the gap and deliver that accompany function as well. Does that provide enough, General?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yes. Thank you, General Tickell. Thanks for that overview. I think it is important for our American audience to say, though they may have the same names as Ranger battalions, they really are organized, structured, and missioned somewhat differently. And we Americans have a tendency sometimes to do some mirror imaging, and it's important to understand that distinction. If I could take you back to the modernization issues, and you talked a lot about that, talked about some of the specific platforms that you are working on to develop. One of the key issues, and I know you know this from your engagements with Army Futures Command and others, is interoperability. And so could you talk a bit about how does that factor into the British Army's modernization efforts, interoperability selfishly with the American Army, but more broadly with other allies and partners?
Yeah. So it's interoperability is absolutely front and center, and of course the driver, if I'm being completely honest, is interoperability with the United States, and I don't think that's any surprise. Clearly, we have interoperability that we require through NATO and indeed with our ABCANS partners. But the driver is and will continue to be the United States. And I think, we have now a 5-year modernization program that we have co-signed between the previous Secretary for the Army and our Minister for Armed Forces, which provides the blueprint for the next 5 years between our two armies, which is a really encouraging step because it codifies actually a lot of good work that was going on anyway. And of course, it gets after sort of issues such as digital fires, sustainability, and of course the network, etc. If I was going to be brutally honest, I think that the real challenge that we face actually is being able to exchange and move data between us all. And I touched on it a little bit, but actually, we can be as clever as we want. And of course, we will always, we can swivel chair things and we will always have a like-minded approach to getting after whatever challenge. But in the 21st century, if we are not able to move and interrogate and share data seamlessly, I worry that all of our collective efforts will be hamstrung. So when I talk to Lieutenant General Charlie Flynn, notwithstanding that he's heading off to pastures new, and no doubt, in fact, he's now General Charlie Flynn, so I'm doing him a disservice. And of course, the Vice Chief, etc. It's the thing that we always come back to, because what we find at the moment, and I touched on Warfighter a minute ago. Building the network for Warfighter and driving out all the risks took about 3 months, and that is just not where we need to be if we are standing shoulder to shoulder together, which of course we always will be. We had a luxury, if I may, in Afghanistan because we were static and we were able to get after SIPR, etc., etc. But that is not a luxury that we will necessarily enjoy in the future battle space. And I remember as a commanding officer on Iraqi freedom in the brigade headquarters that I was in 16 Air Assault Brigade, we were fortunate enough to have our American partners with us. But managing those linkages in terms of communications was really challenging in the desert, and we just got it nailed, and then some sort of enormous storm blew in, and we lost it immediately. And therefore, that network and that digital data connectivity is I think that holy grail that we've really got to get after in order to elicit the opportunities.
Yeah, it certainly is a difficult challenge for all. You mentioned in your remarks that your attendance and participation in the U.S. Army's Project Convergence last fall, and that series of experiments continues, and hopefully you'll be able to again participate in that. Talk a little bit about why is it important for the British Army to be engaged in Project Convergence? What do you expect to get out of that is beneficial to your Army?
So, I mean, frankly, the scale of what the United States Army is able to do in any sense always offers us opportunities, and I'm not going to be shy in saying that. And of course, in the same respect, the scale of convergence is huge, and therefore I think there is much to learn. I mean, having had the privilege, as I say, of looking at it last autumn, for us, the ability to genuinely get after AI, machine learning, manned, unmanned teaming is where the opportunities lie, and being able to hand off targets between different air platforms and ground platforms and still deliver the mission load or the payload onto that target offers huge opportunities for all of us. And of course, the trick for us is to get after this any sensor, any shooter, any decider. And if you can do that, the real trick is to be able to do that across our allies as well. It's one thing to be able to do it within the US or the UK, but us being able to hand off targets or identify targets between us is going to really start to get after the enemy's OODA loot that we will get inside. I think the other thing that I'm really interested in is also that sort of the temptation is to focus on kinetic effect. We're doing a lot of work in the non-kinetic area as well, and cyber payloads, EW payloads, I think, particularly, of course, when you're talking sub-threshold, are really, really important. And I hope some of you will be aware of the work that we've got going on with the 6th Division at the moment, which I think is in many ways is absolutely leading edge technologies that we're being able to pull through. I hope that we will also be able to export some of that great work into convergence itself, so we're getting it so it's mutually beneficial. I mean, it's worth saying that on Warfighter over the last few weeks, I think we started to see some of the foothills of that, and there was some really interesting there's been some really interesting work by 3DIV and 3 Corps to really get after that sort of blend of kinetic and non-kinetic effect to frankly completely discombobulate the enemy in a way that the traditional fight hasn't always been able to do.
Good. Thank you very much. We've got time just for a few more questions. I want to ask you a bit about people as a central tenet in the integrated review. And I was pleased to note that in the integrated review, there's a statement that people are not in the Army, they are the Army. That might resonate and be familiar to those in the American Army, but I think it speaks to how we see the challenges ahead in very similar ways. In the integrated review, it talks about people that are comfortable in continual adaptation, looking for innovative people. And you've designed Program Castle. Could you talk for just a few moments about what Program Castle is and why is that important to the fulfillment of the integrated review's vision?
Yeah, so Program Castle's been going for a couple of years, and it is it's very akin to actually the People Task Force that has been driven so well by your chief. But it is designed to get after a different approach to our people, to recognize that they have a set of skill sets that perhaps hitherto, certainly we in the UK, have not been able to exploit to best effect. So I think it was your chief described a story to me when he was in Afghanistan, whereby he was wrestling with some problem or whatever, and I think it was an agricultural problem, and he was talking about this in the talk or whatever, and one of the reservists said, "Oh, hey, sir, I'm actually an agricultural engineer from back home, and I've got all these skill sets," which he then, of course, employed. But the point is, and he said it to me, and this is really what the Castle is about for me, is we need a skills framework that recognizes all of that broader talent beyond, frankly, just a specialization that the Army will give that individual, so that we can exploit all of that capability to best effect and make sure we've got the right people in the right place at the right time. And also make sure that those individuals have a much greater say on their own personal future. Because I think, if you look at Generation Z and subsequently, certainly on from our perspective, our young men and women are not really willing to join an organization that just treats them as a commodity. They want to be recognized as an individual, and they want to be I'm going to say they want to be exploited to their best effect, if that makes sense. And if I use an example, when I was down in Futures Command a couple of weeks ago, there were two young majors that were in the software factory. One was I think a Kiowa pilot, and in fact they were both aviators. But they've been taken out because they had a natural understanding and interest in software and coding. And of course, they're now driving in that software factory some fantastic effect that, frankly, in their normal role, they would never have been able to get after. So they're enthused. They're delivering a fantastic output to the army, which is going to drive change in a way that, with the greatest respect to them, it probably never would have done if they carried on in the right-hand seat of their helicopter. And for me, that is what Programme Castle is all about. What I would say, though, is that in all of that, underpinning everything is we cannot lose sight of our values and standards. And, in the challenges of the 21st century, as we talk to, cyber or whatever it happens to be, the values and standards that we all hold so dear must remain preeminent. And I was talking actually to some very young officers last night, and we were talking about the challenges of command that they face now. And they were talking about technology, etc. But I kept having to bring them back to the fact that the values and standards that they signed up to when they joined the army haven't gone away. And therefore, what they do as leaders 24/7 is the thing that ultimately I will judge them on. So, let's get into the future, but let's not forget how important some of those basics are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you highlighted, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General McConville, has said people first, and it starts with that. And I think Programme Castle certainly seems to be headed in that direction. So thanks. And for all of you who submitted questions, thank you. I'm sorry that we don't have time to get to them all. We will make sure that that Brigadier Tenant has all the questions that you have submitted and for consideration. But General Tickell, if I could ask you to kind of to wrap us up by saying, as you look toward now the implementation of the vision of the integrated review, what are the challenges out there? What will impede you from achieving that vision?
So having got over the hump of the integrated review, I felt a bit sick when I came back from Easter leave, thinking, right, we've now got to go on and implement it. So hey, there are challenges. I mean, clearly there are strategic shocks which could blow us off course, but we accept that. I think if I'm being brutally honest, we've got a really good financial settlement. The trick always is to make sure we can spend it and spend it wisely. And that requires a very close relationship between us and industry. And it also requires an approvals process in the Ministry of Defence that is geared to getting after quick decisions. And I think both sides of the Atlantic sometimes have challenges with approvals and to get things through. We are running, and the Secretary of State is holding us very hard on delivering this change in the next 3 or 4 years. So we need the right following wind with the right overwatch and drive from ministers, which I've got no doubt we'll get. We need a stable platform in terms of our money, and we need industry to move with us and step up to the plate. The one thing I'm absolutely comfortable on is that our young men and women will embrace the change and the challenge of the opportunity and move faster than we can potentially keep up. And that is a challenge that I want, because I want them to be dragging us into that vision that I've tried to describe earlier today. So I think hard yards to come, but it's a great problem to have, and we're absolutely after it, sir.
Lieutenant General Chris Tickell, Deputy Chief of the General Staff, thank you, sir, for your time. Thanks for your candor today. More importantly, thanks for your continued friendship and partnership. Thanks for lending Brigadier Tenant to help facilitate this program. It would not have happened without him. But thanks. And you remind us that despite a bit of a rocky beginning in the relationship between our two nations, we are now the closest of allies and friends. I'm glad that we're on the same side. And thank you, sir, for your leadership and for your friendship. And as the integrated review says, it should give Americans great comfort that the British Army is moving in a direction, and as the integrated review says, ready for the next challenge, not the last. There's a lot that we can learn together as we forward this path. So thanks, sir. Thanks for for joining us today. For our audience, again, thank you so much for having joined us today. A preview of a couple of upcoming events that you might want to pay attention to. Our next Thought Leaders webinar will be on the 3rd of June with a panel discussion on the future of Army talent management with members of the U.S. Army's Talent Management Task Force. I suspect many of the issues that General Tickell spoke of with Program Castle are many of the same types of initiatives that the Talent Management Task Force is working on. On the 9th of June, we'll host another Thought Leaders webinar with Lieutenant General retired Ben Hodges, co-author of Future War and the Defense of Europe, following on General Tickell's comments. On the 29th of June, we'll host a very interesting Thought Leaders webinar with the Colonel retired Tom Vossler and Dr. Jeff McCausland, who are the authors of Battle Tested, Gettysburg Leadership Lessons for 21st Century Leaders. That should be very, very interesting as well. And for everyone, just 158 days from today, the AUSA annual meeting, 11 through 13 October at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. We are planning to meet in person. Mark your calendars now. Look for more information on the website ausa.org, where you can find out more information about and register for upcoming events. Thanks again to all of you who are AUSA members. We deeply appreciate your membership. It is what enables us to host programs like this. If you are a member, thank you. If you're not yet a member, today's the day. Just go to ausa.org. It's simple, it's easy. We need your membership, we need your support, and we thank you for that. So again, to all for joining us today, we had a great conversation with Lieutenant General Chris Tickell. Thank you all very much, and have a great Army Day in both the United Kingdom and in the United States of America. Thank you.